Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Yuhoo Talks. Today we have on a awesome guest. This is Jeremy. Sorry, is that cool? Call you Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is Jeremy from the WhySoSidious podcast. These guys are great. A little bit of a fun fact, back when I first made a TikTok account and had like zero followers, they were one of the first people to not only follow me, but reach out to me, validate my content, tell me it was good, and ask me to come on their podcast. That was like a really big moment for me, and it made me feel like I made good content when I didn't have a lot of followers. So I really appreciate them for that. But yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the pod, now's your time.
Yeah. So I'm Jeremy, one of three hosts of WhySoSidious podcast. We do all the Star Wars, Marvel, DC, most of the shows, all the big movies coming out, some comic stuff. Throw our stuff on TikTok. We mainly find us on Spotify, for full edited episodes, but we like to throw some stuff on TikTok for that reason to interact with other people. So the comics community is just great. It's really fun to get along. You have those people every now and then that comment on your stuff with just hateful messages, and that always sucks. But I don't think that applies to the comic community. Those are just random people stopping by. But yeah, we do all that stuff. Shows some random stuff like a nerd octagon where we put a bunch of characters together, see who wins, and discuss why they win. But all kinds of stuff. We have over 100 episodes, so yeah, check us out.
Yeah, definitely check them out. If you like my stuff, you're gonna love their stuff. I'll link it down below. But today we're gonna be talking about a comic book that I just recently read. I totally, completely adored. That's gonna be Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis. I reached out to Jeremy. We were trying to figure out what to talk about, and he suggested Daredevil, and I just finished reading it. And I will say Daredevil by Bendis is one of my favorite comics I've read so far. It is incredible. And I'm just curious, before we get into the Daredevil by Bendis aspect, what is your history with Daredevil look like? As far as the comics go.
Okay, so my history with Daredevil started with Frank Miller because that is a very highly recommended series there. So I read it, I liked it, didn't love it as much as people thought, but then I hear about this Bendis run, and I don't know if you tried to collect it in physical form, but when I learned about it and I wanted to buy it, it was impossible to find it in paperback, omnibus. So for months I was looking for it. Finally got my hands on both the omnibus and the 3 volume Ultimate Collection. And I actually flipped the omnibus and made a couple $100, and that was cool. But I kept the 3 volume paperback. But it blew me away. It's everything that I loved about the Netflix Daredevil show actually is this carries that same vibe and the realism. I'm sure we'll get into it more. But yeah, when I read the Bendis Daredevil, I couldn't stop reading it. It's such a good story. And it doesn't have to be a superhero story to be good. It's just so well written. It's just a good story. And yeah. And
I
then after
totally
that, sorry, but I also the Chip Zdarsky stuff. I read all that. The Ed Brubaker stuff that takes place right after. Read all that. So I have a lot of Daredevil histories. Great character.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. I tried to collect this and the omnibus is out of print. Basically impossible to get a hold of, and it really annoyed me. I read it on the Marvel Unlimited app, which is not my ideal reading style. And that's why it took me so long to read it, because I just have this tiny phone and I can't, it's hard for me to read comics on that. But still, I was able to read it so quickly. I loved it. And so I know you just reread this comic, right? Like this wasn't your first read through. So I'm curious, rereading this book compared to maybe the first time you read it, how does it compare? And was there things you picked up on or didn't notice the first time around that stood out way more?
I think this is best on your first read. I really do, because there are a lot of surprises and there are a lot of things you don't expect to happen that happen. So it went from like a 9.8 the first read down to like a 9.6. It's still amazing on the reread. Some arcs that weren't my favorite the first time around, I was actually pretty bored reading. Just a couple arcs that I don't love. Um, I really didn't like reading a second time because there are a couple slow arcs, but it is a long story, so you're not going to have every single issue as a banger, right? But yeah.
What were the arcs that maybe you didn't love as much?
So when Mr. Bont comes back, the 93-year-old guy who used to be Kingpin, right, and he kind of wants to take revenge on Matt. That whole arc was kind of iffy for me, and then some of the Black Widow stuff doesn't work a lot for me.
Oh man, I actually really like that stuff. I thought it was cool seeing the kind of older Daredevil with the yellow suit on, cleaning up crime back in the day. I like that a lot, but I can see where you're coming from. I guess my follow-up question to that is one of the reasons why I do love this story so much is because there are so many different arcs. It's told through the perspective of Matthew Murdock, excuse me, but it's also told through the perspective of other people. There's this one arc that really stood out to me where there was a like a therapy group session for a bunch of people who were affected by Daredevil, and you see the story of Daredevil told through these different persons' perspectives, and I thought that was totally brilliant. And I'm kind of curious, is there any specific arc in this book that really impacted you in a similar way in which the representation of Daredevil wasn't necessarily through the lens of Matthew Murdock, but someone else? Because I think Bendis does that a lot in this story.
I think when Ben Urich starts talking about Daredevil and going over all that stuff, every time he's explaining things that happened in the past or things that have currently happened, I'm really drawn into that. He tells it really good. That character is really good. He's in all kinds of different titles. He was big in the Netflix show, but he's so close to the story and he tells it in such a way that he's a civilian on the sidelines just reporting on these things. And also when he knows the identity, and J. Jonah Jameson was sitting there like, if you know who Daredevil is, you have to tell me. Like, how could you possibly keep that from me? And he's like, well, that's not really in my place to tell. If I tell you, I'm going to lose out on a lot of information that I actually write on. That you want these stories, right? Well, if you want these stories, I can't just give away his identity and break that trust. And then even Peter Parker was in that room, right? And he said the same thing. I know Daredevil's identity, but I'm not going to tell you. So I think Ben Urich is one of the best side characters in any comics.
Yeah, no, that arc was actually incredible, especially at the end with Peter Parker and Ben Urich, where they're kind of like exchanging glances at each other, and it's like, does he know? I don't know. That was excellent.
Yeah.
Another question I have is I've only read I haven't even read the full Frank Miller run. I've read the kind of I forget what it's called, but it's the omnibus that has the Frank Miller stories written after his initial run. So like Born Again and the Origin. I forget what that one's called. I'm gonna read Frank Miller eventually, but like I said, all I've read is that Frank Miller like companion omnibus as well as Bendis's, but you seem to have read more Daredevil. So I'm curious on the reread, especially how does the Bendis story hold up? No spoilers, of course, but how does the Bendis story hold up to all these other massive authors that have worked on the title, like Brubaker and Zdarsky and Frank Miller?
That's a tough question. So how Bendis's story matches up to the other stories. It's the best Daredevil story for me. It really is. Now, Chip Zdarsky's run, I think, is more flashy, and the art is. I love Chichetto's art on the Zdarsky run, and it's just. I think the Bendis is so well written. It's the best written Daredevil story, in my opinion. And the Frank Miller stuff, you're right. Born Again is probably the best. I think that origin is called Daredevil: A Man Without Fear. That's another of his best. And his main line is good. It is good. I think I like it less than most people, but I also have trouble reading those. It might have been like a late 80s story. I don't know. They always come with a little bit of that corniness, a little bit of that campiness. But there are some amazing arcs like Kingpin's Return. He comes back violently and causes a lot of conflict, obviously. And then the big moment is with Bullseye. Like Daredevil almost kills Bullseye by throwing him off of this like clothing line they were fighting on or something. And then they had that arc called Russian Roulette, where Daredevil's pointing a gun in his head and he's like saying he's going to kill him, and they just have a lot of dialogue there. So there's big highlights of Frank Miller's run, but nothing really does it like Bendis does. He was a detective crime noir writer before Marvel or DC, so he really shines through this Daredevil story.
I guess well, that's one thing I kind of want to follow up on is the theme or like the tone of Bendis's run. Um, I'm not gonna tell you right now. I'm just curious, what is it about the tone of Bendis's Daredevil run for you that makes it so unique?
It's the realistic nature of it that it could take place outside of a Marvel or DC story. It could take place in a real world story. Aside from the ultra senses of Daredevil, everything else is super realistic. And it carries that grittiness and it carries that crime noir. Like, we're not scared of aliens attacking. We're scared of the court summons you're going to get in the mail. It's something that you could actually believe happening in our world. Um, that I like to compare it to the Netflix Daredevil series. It hits those same beats, and it's super easy to read in that way. Like when he's not beating people up, the story is almost even better as him as a lawyer or him trying to protect his identity. So I think that's what stands out there.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. That's why I love it too, because it feels so grounded and gritty. And another reason it feels so grounded and gritty is the art. I think it's Alex Maleev. Is that how you
Mm-hmm.
pronounce it?
Yeah.
I didn't love it when I first started reading it, but it grew on me slowly over time. But there were still some moments where I kind of wish they gave me more. And I know you mentioned Zdarsky's run is very flashy with the art. Obviously, Frank Miller's run with his art, with the Klaus Johnson art, amazing, right? And I even looking at something like Soul, it's a little more hyper realistic, but you can see more. I'm curious, how did you feel about the art in Bendis's run particularly?
So how do I feel about the art? I'm not a huge fan of the art itself, but I think it's perfect for this story. It's like dark and gritty and like messy in a way, just like Matt Murdock's life becomes. It doesn't need to be flashy. It's mostly just people talking. So we don't need those crazy splash pages and that ultra realistic. Who am I thinking of? I wouldn't want Jim Lee on this. I wouldn't want Ivan Reese on this. I think it's perfect for what it is: gritty, grounded, and just enough to get what's going on.
Absolutely. Another question I had is that, like I said before, I haven't read a lot of Daredevil, so there's a lot of context I'm missing out on. I think, the relationship he has with Bullseye is pretty important. I kind of picked up on it. I guess Karen Page is dead. I didn't really know about that until I started reading this. And I'm curious, as someone who has a deeper history with Daredevil, what were some specific moments in this book where you have that pre-existing context where you see something happen in Bendis's run and you're like, whoa, that's really cool. That's a nice little throwback.
Well, the death of Karen Page is huge for this, right? Ben Urich says it might be the cause of him going through this like mental breakdown. He said ever since Karen Page died, Foggy said this too. Ever since Karen died, he seemed to have a kind of a downward, violent spiral where he might not be making the best decisions. The run where that happens is actually the first arc of the Marvel Knights print, where like they just started the Marvel Knights thing, and Kevin Smith wrote the first arc in the Marvel Knights Daredevil. I think it's called uh like the Devil Guardian or something like that. But that arc is where Karen Page dies. Bullseye kills her in that church. And it is the same run technically. It's this Daredevil numbered series because Bendis's starts at 26. Kevin Smith's arc was like 1 through 6, and that was where Karen Page died. And that was a pretty like it didn't age well because Daredevil, like there was this baby that people thought might have been the reincarnation of Jesus or the reincarnation of the devil, and Daredevil just tosses him off the building at one point, thinking he's killing the devil. The baby doesn't hit the ground, don't worry. But you can see how that's kind of a strange decision for a hero to make that people might not like that much. But that is where that started, and of course, all the Kingpin drama that started ever since Frank Miller. But definitely, Kevin Smith's run is the biggest that impacted this series.
Yeah, I think I read a couple issues of it and it didn't really stand out to me, and then I never went through with it. But I do remember the baby, and I think at that moment I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna skip to bed.
It's kind of weird. Don't have a
Um,
lot of heroes throwing babies off buildings.
you really don't these days. Um, I'm curious. I know Bullseye is a character that you really love. I know, in the last podcast you mentioned him a little bit, and he plays a pretty significant role in this story as well. Is there anything about Bullseye in particular that makes him like so compelling to you, especially in this story?
Bullseye is so compelling to me because he's a force of nature, but he's like barely powered and he's terrifying. If Bullseye's coming after you, like you're probably just going to die unless hopefully Daredevil stops him. But just the way that, like, what made me fall in love with Bullseye was Warren Ellis's Thunderbolts run because he was a part of this Thunderbolts crew full of powered people, Venom, uh, oh God, Penance, super powered people, but he was their nuclear deterrent. When things got wrong, he would come in and win the conflict for them because of his super accuracy and relentless ruthlessness. So he's just scary, but he's not even powered. Like he just has super good accuracy. And I think that's what makes him so compelling.
Yeah, I guess in this run, particularly, he plays a pretty big role in just like trying to hunt down Daredevil, and they have a lot of different showdowns. And those moments, to me, it feels like they're loaded with a lot of um context that didn't happen in Daredevil by Bendis. I guess that's probably just the death of Karen Page from Kevin Smith's run, right?
And and the death of Elektra. He also killed Elektra in Frank Miller's run. So that's two big loves of Matt Murdock's that were killed by the same person. So he's like his ultimate bad guy. He's very haunting, and the things that he did killing those two girls had an effect on Matt the rest of his life. So it's like the definition of the big badass, the Joker to the Batman, right? Reverse Flash to Flash. That's bullseye for Daredevil.
You think so? Because to
Absolutely.
me,
Well,
I feel like it might be Kingpin. At least for this run, especially. His presence was phenomenal. The relationship they have, the weight of Kingpin's revelation hitting the ground where everyone knows Matthew Murdock is Daredevil, and just the power he's able to wield over Daredevil while still being able to respect him, and Daredevil still fears him, even though he doesn't have this leverage anymore. He loses everything, right? Kingpin loses absolutely everything, and he is still one of the most monstrous threats imaginable. It's crazy.
it is. The thing with Kingpin is that respect that you just mentioned. Like they almost have an unwritten agreement to leave each other alone up to a certain point in this run. After that point, they're back to being like ultimate villain and hero, like going into Brubaker's run and Soul's run and past that, Zadarsky's run. But they have like this unwritten agreement, like they respect each other in a way. Whereas Bullseye just comes in and kills people he loves, and he just comes in as a terror. Um, the biggest thing Kingpin has done to mess up Daredevil was that Born Again arc, tearing his life apart, his personal life. And even in this run, he does out him again to the feds, which eventually leads to Daredevil going back to jail. So I would say Bullseye is the Joker to the Daredevil, and Kingpin's more like the Ra's al Ghul to Batman, where he's always there, he's always a huge threat, but for the most part, they kind of leave each other alone.
That makes a lot of sense. I never really thought of it that way. Um, Kind of shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious, what is your favorite arc in Bendis by Daredevil? There's a lot, but like what was the one arc in particular where you read it and you were just like, man, I could reread this for days.
Yes. Okay, that would be after Silk ousted Daredevil's identity, and Daredevil says, "I'm not Daredevil. I'm going to sue the Daily Globe for telling the public I'm Daredevil." And then Kingpin comes back, and then Daredevil just wrecks Kingpin and then calls himself the new Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen. And the issue after that, Bullseye comes in because Kingpin hires Bullseye again to kill Daredevil. Doesn't go well. Daredevil, this is like an unhinged Daredevil. And you saw what he did to Bullseye, beat his ass and then tears that bullseye into his forehead. And then we skip to a year later when Daredevil, calling himself the Kingpin, actually made Hell's Kitchen super safe. But you had like some Avenger characters, Doctor Strange, Reed Richards, Spider-Man, Luke Cage, come over here and tell him, like, hey, man, like they might have left Hell's Kitchen, but they're messing with our territory now. Crime is down in Hell's Kitchen, but it has raised everywhere else outside of Hell's Kitchen. And that conflict there. So, and all that while Daredevil's trying to protect his identity. So it's like the middle of the run, and I think that's such a good read.
Yeah, I remember that distinctly where they all meet up with him in the park and they're trying to talk him down and he's like, "No, like this is my city. I'm gonna protect it. I don't care." I thought that was so like I don't know. It really changed the way I look at Daredevil as a character, but it also was so compelling. And you kind of already hinted at this, but I'm curious what is maybe your least favorite arc in this
So
run?
yeah, I think it's the Mr. Bond arc. Like I just rereading it, I was like, this doesn't do anything for me. Mr. Bond comes in and tries to terrorize him. Gladiator helps him out a little bit. Mr. Bond ends up dying of a heart attack. And I remember just not a lot going on the lawyer side of things during that. which I always look forward to that. I love seeing him just doing his civilian work. And this is a 93-year-old dude coming back to take vengeance. Like, it's not scary. There's not a lot of weight on this. Like, I don't know anything about this guy. There's no history with him. So it didn't feel important or anything. It just felt like, a nice little side story.
Touching on the lawyer stuff, I think the lawyer stuff in this book was actually more compelling for me than the Daredevil stuff because there's this one arc in particular. I think it's the White Tiger, is that his name?
Yeah.
Where he defends a superhero in court who was like wrongly accused of murdering someone, and I think he loses the case. And then that superhero, I think they killed themselves. I might be misremembering, but dude, it was like 3 issues, 3 issues of just law, like court law room dialogue. It was incredible. And that really impacted me and demonstrated to me like why I think Bendis is really suited for the character of Daredevil because he excels at that dialogue in a way that not a lot of authors can do. Like it's not easy to make a courtroom drama feel fast paced and consistently engaging. So I'm curious in that regard. Is there like any law room moments in Daredevil that like outside of maybe the White Tiger or even the White Tiger arc that had you thinking, yeah, I don't really care about Daredevil as much as I thought I did. I care about Matthew Murdock. And B, what is it about Bendis's style in particular that elevates Daredevil to that next level? Not just the tone of it being super gritty, but the means he uses to communicate that.
So, first of all, I'm going to agree with you that the White Tiger courtroom scene was one of the best. And to for your memory, remember he gets they say he's guilty, and then he like attacks officers and tries escaping. So then the officers shoot him down and he dies on the steps outside the courtroom. But that's a fascinating story right there. And another one that I love in the courtroom stuff was like the very first issue or two of Bendis's, where he puts this pharmaceutical company, wins a huge case against them because they were, harming citizens just by selling their stuff. And the whole series starts with a huge win in the courtroom. And I don't know what it is that Bendis does, but Bendis writes his courtroom scenes like the most believable like courtroom movie that you could see. It's like the best possible dialogue. It's just him defending, talking to the jury in the best way. And the dialogue's always spot on. It's very believable. He makes great points for his clients. And sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses. So it's not like he just wins every courtroom case like you would kind of expect a superhero lawyer to do. He would just go in, say some stuff and win every case. But no, it feels like if he says the wrong thing, they're screwed. Like he has to win these cases. And Bendis makes you feel that tension while he's writing this. And yeah, Matt doesn't always win, but when he does win, it's cool. When he doesn't win, it's still good. He puts up a good case. And yeah.
So I one thing about this story that also stood out to me was how morally gray Matthew is. He's a superhero and he does good things, but he doesn't necessarily feel like a good person all of the time. And so I'm kind of just wondering, how do you feel about Matthew Murdock? How do you feel about Daredevil? Do you think they are good people or as good as people as they believe they are? Because that's a question I think that's posed in this run quite a bit.
So how how do I feel about Matt? Like, so it actually gets brought up with conversations with him and Luke Cage, where at first I was kind of perplexed that he did lie to the public and say, I'm not Daredevil. I can't believe people are saying I'm Daredevil. I'm going to sue the company that's calling me Daredevil. And at first I was like, yeah, that really does seem morally gray. Like, are you sure that's the right decision? Like, don't you want to be honest and put it behind you? The paparazzi is never going to go away. Like, this is out to the public. Everybody believes you're Daredevil now. Like, this will never go away. And Luke calls him out on that. But his response to Luke is what kind of made me think maybe he should lie to the public. He says, well, my dad's dream was for me to be a lawyer. My dream was to be a lawyer. I do a lot of good for people as a lawyer. Like, if I oust myself as Daredevil, I cannot be a lawyer anymore. All the good that I can do as a lawyer is out the window. So now all I have is beating up bad guys. So that kind of made me think maybe he is doing the right thing. Like, I don't know. Other than that, I think he is a good guy. He's stopping the right people. He's stopping the bad guys, whether it's the Owl or Kingpin or Bullseye. Um, the one other thing I could see that was a little morally gray is allowing himself to get into another relationship with Mila Donovan. Pretty honest up front, of course, says he's Daredevil. She's fine with it. But you just got to realize that it's not going to end well. Look at your first two relationships, Elektra and Karen, dead. And of course, Bullseye tries to come back and kill Mila. So it's like, I mean, so lying to the public could be argued as not the best decision. But then again, like giving away his status as a lawyer, there's a balance there. But then getting into another relationship with Mila, where he does deserve love. Like, what is he supposed to do? Just never love anybody, never have a relationship? I don't know. But those are the two decisions: lying and another relationship with another blind girl. There's a scale there that can be argued both sides. And I would only argue to a certain point that he's doing the right thing, because you can argue the other side that he's not making the best decisions.
See, I think the Mila relationship is really interesting because I think like when they get divorced, he like kind of just like he like refuses to sign the divorce papers and he kind of keeps referring to her as his wife. And I thought that was such a dick move. Like I feel like he was kind of a bad person for that and he was trying to like gaslight her into staying with him almost because it's like, dude, she left you. I get that he like doesn't want to get over it. He loves this woman, but at the same time, I thought it was a very selfish thing to do. Like refusing to sign a divorce paper, keep referring to this person as your wife, not letting yourself be with other women because you're a married man, even though your wife isn't there. I thought that was really that really painted Matthew Murdock to me in a negative light. And I realized maybe like he was kind of using his religion, especially to like justify being in this union, I think. And it posed a lot of questions. And I'm curious how you felt about that specific side of Matthew Murdock.
Yeah. And like I said, it seems selfish from the get go. Just falling in love with this girl, having her come into your life. I found it funny that as soon as Black Widow came to visit, he pulled the papers out and maybe was going to sign them because he thought he was going to get a little action that night. So he was like, "Hey, man, if I'm officially divorced now, then I won't feel so bad about this." Now, of course, I think Black Widow ended up leaving that night anyway. But he also ended up signing them eventually. And he gave the papers to her and said, "I signed them. I'm respecting your decisions." But it did take a while. So again, yeah, it seemed like a little selfish, which is kind of a lot of these decisions he's making. I don't know if he's making the right decisions because his friends are the ones that pay the price ultimately for a lot of the decisions he's making. So there is a degree of selfishness in this Bendis Murdoch character, right?
Absolutely. Um, I guess kind of tying it up here a little bit. One question I have is that as someone who has read so much Daredevil, at least more than me, right? What would you say to someone who wants to read this run but hasn't read any Daredevil?
I would say if you want a gritty, realistic, street level story, this is where you go. And don't expect giant splash page action, but expect a very compelling story full of conflict, whether it's him trying to protect his identity, him trying to protect clients in the courtroom, or him fighting bad guys, of course. I would say definitely if you're looking for that, read Bendis for sure. I would say it's one of the best Daredevil runs. It's one of the best comics. And it doesn't feel like a superhero story at all. It feels like a fully nonfiction story.
Yeah, no, it really does. And that's why I think I love it so much. And I guess one final question for the road, right? Daredevil as a character, Matthew Murdock as a character, he's very complex. He has a lot of nuance to him. He's not like, a Superman where it's like, oh, I'm a good guy and I'm gonna do good things. It's like, no, he does things that like maybe other superheroes don't do. And my question to you is, how would you, as like an individual, how would you explain that to people who maybe are kind of expecting more of a traditional superhero story? How do you explain the nuance of Daredevil to someone? I know it's a tricky question, but
If I was going to explain the nuance of Daredevil, I would say if you're a big fan of Superman or Obi-Wan or those characters that are like pretty much all good. Like if you like that, then Daredevil might not be for you because there's two sides to Daredevil kind of. There's kind of a dark side, there's a selfish side, and of course there's the good side, but he is not a black and white good character, which can be boring. Stories Superman sometimes can be like that. I still love Superman. Obi-Wan kind of all good. I still love Obi-Wan. But I would say Daredevil is definitely like go into this knowing that you might not really like him that much. You might like him, you might love him, but there's a chance that you're going to disagree with some of the decisions he makes for sure.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But hey, listen, huge shout out to Jeremy WhySoSidious coming on. Like I said before, definitely check their stuff out if you haven't already. They make some amazing content. I'm gonna link them down below. But yeah, that's this episode about Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis. Definitely read this story if you haven't already. I think the omnibus is actually coming back in print next year, so I'm looking forward to that if you're trying to find somewhere to cop it. But yeah, hope y'all enjoyed. Thanks for watching. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.